Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today it's a big one. We're going to be talking about the newest project from J. Cole, The Off Season. It's never been that I don't get J. Cole. If anything, I wish I understood him a little less, and his popularity. Might wind up liking the music more. Because really, if there's been a searing indictment of the 2010s in terms of rap superstardom, it's been a lot of the widespread commercial success of J. Cole, coupled with the follow-up that he's a rapper who deserves way more critical acclaim than he gets, and that I'm personally biased or I've got an axe to grind by not giving it to him. After all, Kendrick Lamar sells like gangbusters. He gets all sorts of rapturous critical praise. They're basically in the same lane. They're doing the same thing, right? Now, I'm not fond of this argument. First off, why exactly do you care so much what I think if the art is that resonant to you? It's not like my analysis is going to put a dent in his millions. But more importantly, it presents a false parallel between two lyrical rappers from two very different camps who just so happen to have the right business mechanisms in place to blow up in the 2010s. Great business and marketing doesn't imply that your music is great by extension, especially considering J. Cole is backed by a rock nation, aka Jay-Z, aka one of the leading purveyors of that same false equivalency for decades now. But again, I get why J. Cole is popular beyond just the business. In comparison with Kendrick, who's going to go off on weird spiritual or jazz rap tangents that wind up provocative because in order to fight his own demons, he winds up speaking truth to power, J. Cole is the everyman, who won't really go there as often, and he doesn't have to, especially these days. He's approachable, he's flawed, and by extension, he's relatable. And to cap it off, he's a really good technical rapper who presents himself as thoughtful without getting too heady. And his production's often stripped back enough that anyone could approach it. You can see yourself rapping over it. On the surface, he would seem like rap's ultimate centrist, just trying to make a life for himself and his family, find success in the modern world, that middle child that you can both relate to and admire, and like in the majority of these cases, when actually faced with a real challenge to these principles, he reveals some of his true colors, and they aren't nearly as neutral as they might seem on the surface. Now, some of us were pointing this out years ago, in highlighting that J. Cole has had a bit of a reflexive, conservative, capitalist streak for a long time now, where the other side of his idealism might contain a lot less principle. And if anything, that's kind of what soured me on him, especially as he has framed himself as being very enlightened and forward-thinking. And why am I now getting flashbacks to my last Lana Del Rey review? I feel like I've been down this road before. And when you pair it with a lot of stale, textured, but utterly drab production that was intended to draw attention to all that thoughtful lyricism because he produced it all himself, in-house, no features, it made it kind of clear how undercooked so much of this material really was, especially if you were listening to any music vaguely outside the mainstream or your average streaming playlist. Call me a nerd all you want, but there's a lot more out there that does this a bit better. And while I've been getting heat for these opinions for years now, like with Lana Del Rey, last year to my surprise, some of the public actually started catching on due to J. Cole's utterly wrong-headed single Snow on the Bluff and its targeting of No Name, who at least to me, both a better rapper and artist, and her 2018 album Room 25 is better than anything J. Cole has ever released. Yeah, I'm bringing that energy. But even aside from the fact that the conversation J. Cole wanted to have might have good intentions and was probably best held away from mixed company, I do appreciate Snow on the Bluff for how revealing it really was. It highlighted the growing debate in black activism surrounding liberal incrementalism versus leftist structural reform. And more importantly, it ripped away some of J. Cole's veneer of thoughtfulness for an audience who was steadily growing a little bit more perceptive of what he was saying and doing. It revealed a rapper who, in the tradition of Jay-Z, will play plenty of lip service and reportedly work behind the scenes in order to support the movement and people within the system, but had no real interest in fighting the system that advantaged them. And J. Cole's mingled blend of condescension and incurious approach to some of the ideas rooted in the movement said a lot more, which stands as a reflection of some of the stands that would love to crown him at the best and place him atop that hierarchy, but never look just outside of it, for even those in his own camp who can do his sound just as well, if not better, or wonder why we even need a hierarchy in the first place. In other words, confirmation to a lot of what I've been saying since 2014, but it's not like I'm surprised to see the reflection of the laziness or the refusal to read or listen. I get how the music business works. It's just kind of disappointing because it's such a narrow way to approach some art and social movements. If J. Cole wants to find something that he can feel, I mean, doing the work to look both within and without, it might get him there. He's tried this before, and he's had all the opportunities to do so. He's gotten close, and yet it hasn't really happened. And I don't know, maybe it was just some last-ditch hope that gave me some expectations for the album. At least until I saw some of the bars that were clipped onto Twitter that gave me the sinking feeling he could be doubling down, but I wanted to see the context. And you know what, maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe J. Cole the Everyman doesn't belong on that pedestal. We should just judge the album, ignore the coal miner hype for the stand fervor that it is, just give the album a chance on a bit of a lower standard. At least the album art is legit excellent. I think this looks really good, so maybe something translates? You gotta be kidding me with this. This is it? Really? This is all we got from J. Cole? This is what sparked so much controversy on the timeline, good and bad? In the way, the title of this is kind of fitting because the album almost feels a little bit casual, something put together outside of regular competition with the intensity dialed back. Hell, J. Cole has said in interviews that he's not really looking to compete with Drake or Kendrick Lamar anymore. He's comfortable at their level, just doing his own thing now. It kind of makes sense this would be the project J. Cole would have worked on throughout the lockdown. Tonally, that works. But going through this, I'm honestly wondering how much of his own thing we're even getting here. Because it's not even like this is bad for what it's trying to do so much as it just feels like it's just there, kind of incomplete. A project that's more placeholder for something with more intensity or depth or flair, or taking at least one more step deeper, with J. Cole kind of in cruise control, and at worst sounding like he would rather be doing anything else, like playing professional basketball. At least For Your Eyes Only and KOD sounded like J. Cole was a little bit more thematically ambitious. This project doesn't take anything close to the risks that those two did, even if they didn't work. And again, it's not even like this is bad in comparison to The Field or his other albums. It's definitely better than For Your Eyes Only. Hell, it might even inch past KOD in terms of a few stronger cuts. That makes it his best since 2014 Forest Hills Drive, but the hype thrown behind this feels completely off in comparison with both Cole's catalog and everyone else, even in a slow year for hip-hop like I do think this is. Now again, I will say, I don't think this is a bad album, or one completely without merit, so let me throw everyone a bone here and talk about what I like about this album. And I'm gonna start with J. Cole himself as a rapper. Again, in terms of a lot of his technical skill, and even varying his intensity, he sounds like he's somewhat engaged and on point. When I said cruise control, I meant more about the content, which we will get to. But in terms of a lot of his presentation, J. Cole does draw your attention. He has that magnetism, he's got charisma and energy, and even if he's not really a strong singer, when he embraces more melody, he's not bad, even if it's more in a Drake mold of half crooning, more based on presence than skill. And even though no features are officially credited, I'm not gonna complain about the ones that we got. Lil Baby once again steals the show on Pride is the Devil, Boz is singing It's Alright on the hooks when he shows up, and even if 21 Savage sounds a little bit out of his element properly, he is good for what he needs to do on My Life with Morray, who I absolutely think could have afforded his own verse beyond just the hook. He could have held his own. His debut proved that. And I'll also say there are elements of the production that I actually really like. A big complaint over J. Cole's last two projects was how hands-on he was in making a lot of the beats, and there was a dusty sterility that got tedious really fast. So while he still has some production credits on the majority of this album, bringing a few more people into the room adds a little bit more color to things, a little bit more soul. Even T-Minus pulls together a sharper balance on Pride is the Devil that has probably the best groove on the entire album, one of the standout cuts. Hell, one thing that this album gets unmistakably right is the percussion. From the cymbals to the snares to the 808s, there's a well-balanced mix and an impact to even the trap-adjacent cuts that's got both texture and richness. And it makes me wish that a lot more trap albums have percussion that sounds this good. The beats here, Great! If only the rest of the production choices clicked for me, because that's a much more of a mixed bag, and sadly a fair amount of this was kicked off with that single, The Climb Back. I mentioned this last year on Billboard Breakdown, but just how J. Cole bent and chipmunked that sample was excruciating for me, especially as it is the longest song on the album. 100 Mil has this problem too, to a lesser extent with T-, as does Close. Even more exasperating there because the storytelling on that song is more layered and it's got some actual payoff, but it's just kind of hard to appreciate with that keening sample going through it. And look, while I get the era of chipmunk soul that J. Cole is clearly calling back to, he's also not Kanye West and chopping it up, and it just winds up sounding a lot less pleasant. In fact, if I'm looking at a lot of dicey production choices, more often than not, J. Cole was the primary or only contributor, like on Applying Pressure with all those cheap-sounding air horns and spacey effects that would have peppered a song in the 2000s, and it comes across really dated, even as someone who doesn't mind that production era. Or how he interwoven a speech from Martin Luther King behind him on that song, which doesn't just remind me of when J. Cole said Martin Luther King would have been on Dreamville, but also how a certain stripe of capitalist rappers have appropriated from leftist activists in the past year or so. And once you know, this just so happens to be the song where J. Cole has that quoted line, "If you broke and clowning a millionaire, the joke's on you," which some will argue is primarily pointed at all those rappers who are faking all their wealth and success, but has also been seen as a subliminal shot at No Name yet again. And given the larger framing of the flexing on this album, that's not an interpretation that requires much work to find. I saw people in No Name's mentions, and J. Cole knows what he's doing. Even on the same song, he says when people throw shots online, it's a benign gesture, which we know is bullshit given Snow on the Bluff. You're not fooling anyone. But okay, back to the production again. The strange thing is that there are a bunch of detours on this album that seem to be promising a much more sprawling, much more impactful cinematic listen, especially as J. Cole usually drops a single extended verse per song and seems to treat hooks as an afterthought. The album opens up with Cameron playing Hype Man and with an outro crib from a Lil Jon song that I actually really like, but the album doesn't build any sense of consistent momentum off that into the very nice but much more languid, watery guitars on Morray. In other words, we get a snippet that we might actually get J. Cole moments that feel a little bit less self-serious, dare I say a bit more fun, but it doesn't really materialize. And yeah, sure, J. Cole has never made fun rap music per se. He's not a guy who makes a lot of hype anthems or party jams, and he's not known for his sense of humor. His material tends to be pretty serious, which is why with the more colorful sampling, initially gave me the impression he might be trying for something lighter, but this continues into a project that feels meandering and yet shockingly brief. I feel like this album was a little bit longer, but wound up getting cut down at some point as to not get the assumption of stream trolling, and the pacing feels intentionally askew, which doesn't help the flow and leaves you focusing on the content to see if the lines are being connected to tell a bigger story, or if J. Cole's introspection is building to something deeper or more conceptual, or at the very least if the production might sound more robust. And it is set up for you to think like it's gonna go there. J. Cole's described this project as focusing on the grind, the added work that takes place out of sight to make the best project possible. It's why you call it the off-season, then you sample that snippet of Damian Lillard on Punching the Clock. But it doesn't feel like we ever get a proper climax, instrumental or emotional. More to the point, over the past couple of albums, J. Cole has paid a lot of attention to flow and pulling pieces together. That's why the albums were kind of ran together. But the closest we get to more of an arc here of that unease that builds from 100 Mil to Pride is the Devil to Let Go My Hand, where J. Cole tries to show more of his insecurities and personal demons, providing the impression we're going to see some sort of personal revelation. And we'll come back to this, but it doesn't really happen. And yeah, that means we're going to get to the content. And given the sampling and how soulful a lot of the few hooks that we get are, and how seriously J. Cole seems like he's approaching this subject matter, I'm going to treat it as if it's got some weight and some complexity. If we're gonna go for that high standard, the pinnacle for which he's aspiring in the game, let's keep the same energy, even if there's some wonky or corny lines here, like J. Cole comparing himself to a nicotine company on Morray, or saying that he's working at Squarespace, or that Ja Morant line on My Life. And the first thing to note is that on the surface, this album isn't really political or conscious, and that did kind of catch me off guard. He doesn't have to make a political album, and Lord knows we could all use a little bit of breathing room and distance from some of the heavier stuff, even if there's a fair amount of heavier stuff on the album. But a lot of the past two projects have been in that territory. You'd think one of the rappers celebrated in this lane for it would continue given the times, and again, how serious a lot of this album is. But okay, from the arc I'd previously described, you can tell eventually he's going to try to be a bit more introspective. The everyman actually got to the top. He's now taking stock of himself, eyeing up all the competition to try to pull him down, and starting to dig more into his own personal demons. Now, I could be a bit of an asshole here and highlight how thematically this has some very explicit parallels to Kendrick Lamar's Damn, including references to religious codes from which they both strayed and buckled. And I will say it is kind of cute how both albums feature pride as there's in their 7th song. That's just an interesting little coincidental Easter egg. But from there, given that this is an internal journey, what does J. Cole discover or realize about himself or his environment? Well, it's fundamentally aspirational, less flexing about what he has, and more about the come-up mentality, the drive to rise out of a rougher background, where he's relatable because he admits his flaws and his insecurities, every place where he could have very easily gone astray, especially as he's still haunted as a new father on Let Go My Hand, even if I'm kind of left thinking that that song kind of pulls back on its revelation. It's why Morray and Lil Baby make complete sense on this album given their past content. It's why 21 Savage is an ideal darker mirror to what J. Cole could have been, and it's why Close is probably the most potent lyrical moment on the album, where he laments an old childhood friend who fell into drugs and crime and lost his life as a result, something he could have foreseen, someone that J. Cole could have not saved, even if on Morray he says he never falls out with his bros. But here's the thing. Like Jay-Z before him, this is an aspirational album, where it asserts its own greatness, and the more you believe it to be true, the more emotional resonance it will have. For a lot of fans and stans, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy when projects like this become big. The fame is part of the emotional appeal, in winning within the system, beating the odds. It's why J. Cole has so much contempt for people faking their success and can't back up their bars. After all the hard work he put in, to watch others seemingly cheat, it's infuriating. Someone must have put their hand on the scale in order to enable it, especially as he says there's nothing wrong about bragging about being a broke rapper on their come up if they understand their place, even if he's a little bit condescending when he says it. But it certainly doesn't seem like he's enjoying his success or that never-ending grind. It adds to all those rumors that he's planning his retirement at some point with the fall off, and I kind of believe it now. But hey, it beats being in the streets, because again, at multiple points he highlights where he could have strayed, he could have wound up on that life. And it's not like the streets are ever gonna get better. And this is where you might expect J. Cole to take the next step. Another step. This is where you would expect him to get more political, say something, try to use his power to quell the violence, challenge structural inequalities that enable it. On previous albums, he's certainly gotten close to that, but to him, now it's just the grim reality. You can't regulate evil. And that's why I say this is an aspirational album, but it's not a populist one, because he put in the hard work, he beat the odds, and he's very much aware that he was one of the few to actually make it. After all, that's how odds work. And if you might recognize certain turns of phrase that I'm cribbing from videos on conservatism that Innuendo Studios has put out the past couple of years, you might grasp some of the more incendiary observations I made at the very start. And look, before some of you lose your shit, this is not me blaming J. Cole or his fans for buying into this, or finding emotional resonance in his come-up. We live in a capitalist society that loves to reinforce all of this. It's a worldview that's extremely common. To some extent, we all share it, which is why my issue with J. Cole is when he doesn't seem to recognize or lean into that fact. At least Jay-Z goes in on his uber-capitalist streak and seems to have fun and revel in it, whereas J. Cole frames himself as the flawed everyman, just like you and I, who made it, would never dream of challenging the system or fixing it, and thus by not being political, he shows what he really is. And that's why the millionaire line on Applying Pressure is so revealing and so deeply disappointing to certain folks in 2021. It shows he's not even interested in different or more revolutionary ideas outside his worldview unless they come from someone with deeper pockets. And isn't that telling in and of itself, especially when he wants to reference cancel culture and free speech in the climb back, unaware of the speech that he's not hearing or actively shutting down. But that's also not all the offseason exposes, because despite all that work and all that grind and watching his peers with increasing Drake-esque paranoia, constantly second-guessing his own demons, J. Cole, he made it to the top. And he doesn't sound happy. On Pride is the Devil, J. Cole describes feeling a deep void, only reinforced by his own insecurity. Or to quote him directly, got me feeling different when somebody say they proud of me. But where Lil Baby will then reference The Bigger Picture, his own song of tired frustration at the broken systems, what does J. Cole use to fill that void? Well, that's the problem. By the end of the album, he resolves to continue to stay true to himself. A soldier on that grind, just believe that God will show him the way. It's literally a deus ex machina to end the album, and it completely hollows out both the thematic arc of the project. On an internal journey, it seems like he wound up back where he started, basically unchanged, and any sort of emotional attachment I was trying to build after Close. I mean, this sort of self-serious grind and flex already has an uphill battle to click for me. This kills the impact. And again, for someone where this sort of emotional framing and hypermasculine stoicism clicks, I get it. A lot of professional athletes have been quoted as loving this album, and that makes complete sense to me, especially given their own meticulous grind within that system, and then to maintain it as long as they possibly can before the fall off. And from the part of me that was an athlete a decade or so ago, I get that resonance. I get what this is supposed to make me feel. But given that I'm in a slightly different space now, that added spark doesn't light for me, positively or negatively. So I'm stuck going to the base experience of the album, and it doesn't seem like there's much here. It's emotionally scattered, weirdly paced, a little too short, more a refinement of a sound than an innovation, and a mixed bag at that. And while I can appreciate the technical accomplishments, it's just balanced out by just not seeming all that interesting in the content or convincing in its impact. It feels like an exercise in brand reinforcement from J. Cole. And you know, it's funny, I pissed off hip-hop Twitter this past weekend by saying that I was underwhelmed. If this was your standard of excellence, you could afford to hear more. Now again, it should be obvious standards are subjective. That was in the following tweet. And if this is your thing, it has that emotional resonance. Again, I get it. There's a part of me kind of envious you found that impact, but for me, this is a strong 5 out of 10, and when I can go to Quelle Chris, Little Brother, Freddie Gibbs, and the newer classes Morray, Polo G, even Lil Baby on occasion, and hear both strong flows with often more robust production in similar thematic territory, but with more intricate bars, or a little more maturity, a little bit more wisdom, I just get a little bit more of it, even in that theme. Again, just want to see the bigger picture. That's all. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can imagine I said some controversial, even very political things in this video. Let me stress here that a lot of these are more to inform my experience in impression and interpretation of what J. Cole's put on display, and I've been covering him since 2014, 2013 on my blog, so I've seen these trends grow out and mature from there. And I think a lot of it is context that's very relevant, especially considering as many people want to put him on that pedestal as they do. I think that says something very interesting about this specific style of rap and where J. Cole is specifically aligned. And you know what? Again, it might not be for you. Again, I referenced a whole bunch of rappers who do these themes in a way that actually does work for me. J. Cole just doesn't really hit that resonance. I wish it did. I honestly wish I got more of the hype, but it doesn't quite get there. But beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. Please don't take this as offensive. I do want to say that just because I highlighted these themes, if you have this sort of emotional resonance with it, don't take it to heart. Maybe it's just worthwhile considering it. Just thinking more broadly about what the art says about you and why it sticks with you. That's kind of what I'm trying to get us to get to. See the bigger picture. But hey, if you guys want to help get involved in my presentation or add things to my schedule so we have more fun conversations like this, link to my Patreon right over there. Once again, if you don't feel obligated, because hard times, I understand, but if you want to, options available. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.